Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ Podcast. On this episode, we have Vincent Russo, Vinny, with the back hat. Like everybody knows, operations manager at WCCS in Los Angeles. One of my closest friends, one of the biggest, most diehard car enthusiasts and motorcycle enthusiasts you will ever meet, and somebody who's got his fingers on the pulse of everything on 2 or 4 wheels. Dude, how you doing, brother?
Good. Great. Thank you for having me on.
Always. Oh, dude, it's always a pleasure, my friend. And it's very funny because, like, Vinny and I will probably talk after this podcast just to bullshit more about cars when y'all aren't listening, because that's generally what we do.
Yeah, we do. Talk me off the ledge. That's our talk.
That's it.
Yeah.
So on this podcast, I wanted to bring Vinny on. It's a new year that we all know. We wanted to cover some topics. We wanted to talk about kind of affordable classics going into 2023, some trends from 2022 that we want to see go away, and some trends in the past that have gone away that we wouldn't mind seeing come back a little bit, right?
True. Yeah. There are some that I think we need to revisit.
I agree with that. So, all right, let's talk about let's start with some affordable classics, right? Cars that I think this is a big one where I know so many people that are still trying to get into the hobby, and it seems that over the past 2 years or 3 years, prices of stuff has just gone ballistic.
Insane. Yeah.
Right. But there are still some affordable classics, and I think that most people still reference classics as something from the 50s, 60s, 70s. But I look at classics now as 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, man. We're talking 20, 30, 40 years old.
The 90s are 30 years ago.
Yeah, I know.
You hate to admit it, but it's like, yeah, we're getting to be classics at this point now. So,
oh, dude, I already hit that mark. I'm not a fan, but yeah, I'm there. All right, so what do you think?
So here's a question: when you say affordable classics, do you mean cars that you can buy and enjoy, or affordable classics as investments? Because there's a huge difference there of like just buying something you don't necessarily like just because you know it's going to increase in value, which I'm completely against.
Right.
As opposed to buying something that's still very cool that you can actually afford to drive and not have an aneurysm every time you take it out in public.
I'm going to go that you can afford and drive, because you and I both know, I mean, you and I both have classics. We drive the hell out of them.
Yep.
I don't want to own a car. Listen, if you happen to buy something and it goes up in value, God bless, way to go. But that's not why you should, you should buy it. And if we're talking affordable classics, right, then you should be using that moniker as something to get into the hobby, to enjoy it, to start driving them, right? So I think that's the case. So let's go down that road.
Owned a 30-year-old car. We'll just throw that number out. So we're not picking decades, but a 20 to 30-year-old plus older car, and you've never owned one before. It's an experience. You're going to have things that aren't there in the car that you're used to having now, Bluetooth and climate control. And I mean, some of that's happened in the 90s, but a lot of the modern safety features and the braking
anti-lock brakes and stuff like that.
Like you don't have it, but more importantly, it's the reliability. There's going to be noises and sounds and creaks and fitment issues and things like that, the paint's going to be 30 years old. If it's original, there's a certain way that you have to take care of it.
Well, there's also the fact that a lot of the stuff for like those 80s and 90s cars isn't reproduced yet.
Yeah.
Right. From the aftermarket.
You're in that weird, like they had to make parts for so long, but now they don't make them anymore.
Right.
The good part about, I think, a lot of those cars, though, is back in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of sharing between brands back and forth.
Yes.
And
correct.
so, for instance, when I had my Viper, there's a car that you would, for all intents and purposes, is an exotic car. Right. Everybody, V10, rear-wheel drive, it's super expensive. It's a supercar. And so one of the things that I got to experience with that as an older supercar, and one of the reasons that I went through the process of building it was, could you buy an affordable supercar and work on it yourself without going crazy and breaking the bank and just destroying, the love of the car. And now that car is a little unique because it literally was parts binned by Dodge. They're the only reason Dodge was even able to afford making that car was because they stole door handles from the Dodge.
Well, see, and this is great because when Vinny had this car, we would go back and forth on it. He would call me about when he, if he was doing modifications to fix it, he'd be like, "Do you believe like the alternator came out of a Dakota or whatever, or the ball joints were this?" Yeah. So when he talks about parts bin's car, that's exactly what he means. They pilfered all the other stuff in the catalog and said, "We could put this on this and it'll work."
Power steering pump from the Grand Cherokee. The brakes off that car came with the same brakes, the same Brembo calipers they used on a Ford Cobra. The rear, there was rear suspension parts from a Neon in that car. The hubs, the reason that the Vipers are 6-lug is because the hubs came from the Dodge Dakota. The steering rack came from the Dakota RT. And you start to get into things like, okay, we'll say the steering rack leaked on that, which is a common issue on both the Dakotas and the Vipers. And you go to look at a steering rack and it's like, okay, this is for a Viper, it's super expensive, but like you can buy the seals and just have the steering rack rebuilt because that's what they were doing with the Dakotas. The power steering pump, was an aluminum steering pump. It was the same one that they used on a lot of different Dodges, but in the Cherokee 4.7, was aluminum. And when you go to Napa and you buy that for $50, as opposed to spending $375 at the dealership for the Viper pump, and the only thing you had to do was change the reservoir, which was a little bit different shape, but the pump itself was the same. You can start getting into doing some research, and as the forums grow and the internet grows a little bit more, and there are people from all over the world now that are taking these cars apart and changing them and working out parts. It becomes to be a little bit more affordable. So that being said, we work in cars in the 90s. First thing you have to do is find a car that you like. Something that, and what guys our age or anybody right now is getting into is they're getting into a lot of, I couldn't afford this when I was in high school. I always wanted it. Now I can. We can get into this a little bit more, but I have friends that have started to rebuild their custom cars. Correct. In ways that they never thought they would be possible back when they were in high school, but now they're doing engine swaps and things like that they never even thought of, but they can, but we'll do that later in the next section. So first thing, my opinion, first thing you need to do is you need to find a car that really means something to you, because the level of frustration that you're going to have with an older car is going to be there. So you need to be able to work through that,
You need to be able to justify that frustration and say, I've always wanted this. This is the right thing to do. And again, you are not doing this for resale. You are doing this for yourself, for smiles, for enjoyment, right?
And it's no different than starting to date somebody. Look, there's going to be shortcomings and if you meet a new guy, a new girl or whatever it is, and they're never going to be perfect. But if there's enough there that you like them enough, you look past the fact they leave their laundry on the floor or the power steering leaks on the car or something like that. So some of the things I was kind of thinking about as we were talking about this, car wise, if you want to start a list, I would say the square body Cadillacs.
100%. Yep.
Even into the, like you and I are big fans of the Fleetwoods, the bigger ones, even going into the front engine rear wheel drive Caprice and Impala based ones, because here's an example. You've got a Cadillac. You had an option for, in those Fleetwoods, they were rear wheel drive. So you're not dealing with the North Star front wheel drive stuff.
That's right.
So you can get them in LT1s. And literally all of the custom suspension stuff from the Impalas and all of those things all get bolted on. So now you've got the comfort of a Cadillac, something different, but you can still roll up with the rumble of an LT1, or even, an easy engine swap. If you wanted to put a LS6 or something like that in there, it's already front engine rear wheel drive. It's already got a transmission in it. It's already rear engine. Maybe you re-gear it.
Well, and here's the other part. There's still, you could still work on these cars. Right. 90s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s cars. They're still super analog. They don't have all the, the different power systems that many of the new cars have. So as an amateur mechanic, or if you fancy yourself a decent wrench, you can do the work on them yourselves. They are not rocket science.
Right. And when you get into the Impalas, the Caprice classes, Fleetwoods, you got to think taxi cabs, cop cars.
Exactly.
You can't ask for a car that has more parts available than that. Right. And, when you get into a little bit older, the Cadillacs with, the late 70s, early 80s, again, those drivetrains were shared through everything GM made. So, the general parts, they're simple systems. There are some complicated like AC HVAC systems in some of the Cadillacs and things like that. But again, it's a custom car. You're lucky you have air, it's a classic, most have heat, but I mean, whatever.
Yeah.
Depends on where you live. So that would be my first, is I would say like, those, the older, it seems like the square body Cadillacs, and then you get into the Fleetwoods and the Impalas, like those are starting to get real popular because I think for those reasons, parts are available,
but still affordable, right? You can go out and you can get DeVilles, you can get Fleetwoods. I would say, and if we set a spending cap, say we set a spending cap at 15 grand.
Sure. Oh, all day, dude. You get a low mile Impala Super Sport easy for 15 grand,
right? All day.
Yeah.
And I think that when you start looking at those cars, are you going to, and you have to remember the cars from the late 70s, 80s, early 90s, nothing was very fast. So if you're looking for overall performance, that's going to be on you as the enthusiast over time to make them fast. Now, were there fast things? Sure. If we're talking about a $15,000 budget, you're not going to buy them because you can't afford it. Okay. No,
you'll have to buy a pre-made, somebody that already dumped 25 grand in there, whatever. And now you're picking up them for 15.
Right.
Which is podcast we can talk about buying somebody's product because that's a nightmare too.
Right. But I mean, like, if you're looking for fun stuff when we talk about like, like fourth gen F bodies, right? Trans Ams, Camaros, stuff like that. Those cars from like the early 90s, they are actually pretty quick. They're pretty stout drivetrains. They're affordable. And more importantly, they're reliable. And so if you buy like a 94, 95 Trans Am, that's a 20 plus mile to the gallon car on the highway.
Sure.
Right. Fast, comfortable. Again, you're in that kind of weird GM phase where everything was just battleship gray plastic in the car.
Well, that's the one thing I was going to say. So like, that's a prime example of like, you have to kind of love it because the plastics on those cars and the cloth, they were so brittle that you're going to have squeaks, you're going to have rattles, you're going to have, I go to take the panel off and it breaks in your hand.
It's going to crack.
But there's enough aftermarket support for that these guys are 3D printing parts that we couldn't do 10 years ago.
That's right.
These guys are, and they're printing them in Delrin and plastics that are 10 times stronger, UV resistant. I mean, that'll be the last time you ever have to buy that trim ring or whatever, because it's going to live longer than the rest of the car will, which we didn't have that 10, 15 years ago. But you do have to understand that you're going to get into a IROC, like the one you were building, and there are going to be some delicate places that you need to kind of touch. If your kid goes to get in the car and he's sticking his head out the T-tops at a show and he's stepping on the center console, it's gonna
break.
You're gonna break the hinges. It's gonna something to snap. So, but again, that's part of the enjoyment of having an older car.
Yeah, and I think that the good part about that genre is you're right there between carburation and fuel injection. And what you need to understand is that, like, so for instance, we just did that IROC on Hemmings, and it's, it turned out to be a fun car. And a lot of people were like, I can't believe you got rid of the TPI system on that, and it's just like, guys,
the Crossfire, that worked well.
It's like you look at it and everybody's like, well, that was so iconic. Was it iconic? It was. However, there are no real reproduction parts to make that system function better. No. Okay. So if you want to update the performance, you have to upgrade that. Now, listen, would it be great if somebody came out, like had that intake and they reconfigured it so it still had the same look and bolted on, but before, sure, that would be fine. Yeah. But if stuff breaks, the nice part is there are options that you could upgrade these cars with that takes performance to the next level and increases reliability, which I think honestly is first and foremost, especially if you're in that realm where Vinny and I are, where you just want to get in and drive.
Well, and if anybody out there has ever had a friend or done it themselves where they've taken a carbureted car and put on one of these more modern fuel injection systems from Edelbrock or whoever, now you can get into those systems for $1,500.
Yeah.
And they're basically plug and play. You add a couple of sensors, the wiring harness is there, and boom, it's done. And it's going to run better than TPI or Crossfire any day. But the reverse of it is, say you have the TPI, you don't want to spend the money on fuel injection. To take that motor and convert it and get an intake manifold and just a carburetor.
You could totally do that too.
You just get a Holly. I mean, you're not going to throw check engine codes. You're not going to have to worry about all the programming. you get a carburetor thing and you run the fuel lines and boom, you're done.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, Holley and Edelbrock, there's a reason they're still making carburetors and still coming out with new and improved designs for carburetors, because people still use them. Because listen, they've been around for 100 years. They still work beautifully. Okay. Yeah. They really do.
The quadra-junks and all the rest of the stuff that.
Dude, I mean, I've got I've got 3 carbureted cars and they all run great. They run totally fine. But again, you're in that weird thing, especially if you're talking early 80s or late 70s, where fuel injection was still in its infancy, right? And so some of those systems parts are literally unobtainium. So you have to be careful, especially if you're talking, and we're not just talking American stuff, right? There are European stuff models that you can go buy in that 15 grand range that are still great. You could buy old BMW 3 Series, 5 Series, stuff like that are still, really fun and enthusiast-based cars. But you do have to do some research on, can you get those parts, especially if you plan to drive the car, right? What do you think is like I would say, and again, we're talking not as dailies, these are secondary cars. I would say most enthusiast cars get what, maybe 3,000 to 5,000 miles a year if you really drive them. You think that's that right?
Probably about right.
So if that's the case, then you want to make them reliable. The last thing you want to do is be in your garage and you go out to start it in the morning and all of a sudden you see a puddle underneath it and you're like, shit, well, my day is ruined.
Yeah.
But I think you've got, from the 80s, you've got G bodies, which I think are so underappreciated right now. And Grand Nationals and stuff, yes, they got really expensive, but like Monte Carlo SSs, totally affordable and a great looking car.
Yeah.
Right. El Caminos.
They're starting to go up. I mean, the donk scene has started to adopt a lot of those cars for that exact reason. And a lot of the cars that are going to be on this list, you'll start seeing in some of those categories, like the donk guys are doing Monte Carlos, they're doing the Fleetwoods, they're doing, because they're, like we said, reliable, stout, strong, easy to build. If you're running a Monte Carlo Super Sport on 28-inch wheels at 900 horsepower, not necessarily my thing, but I've been in one and it's amazing, but so what else is on your radar, you think? Because I've got a couple in my head.
So I do go back to a lot of the early JDM stuff, and I don't say that early, but like in the 80s, like I'm a huge fan of the first gen 300ZX. I'm a fan of
that was on my list, but the 1996 was on my list.
Well, 1996 is a fabulous car. That is, and the turbos especially, they're 25, 30 grand. However, you can buy a standard T-top 300ZX, right? 2-seater, 10 grand, 8 grand, 9 grand all day long. And they were still, I think, 230 horsepower or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But comfortable, great sports cars, a lot of fun. Yeah. The Supras, now we're, Fast and Furious Supras, they're out of the realm of possibility. But the previous gen, which would be third gen Supra?
Gen 3, yeah.
Gen 3 Supra, they are great cars. They're comfortable.
If you look at them as not a sports car,
because they're not.
They're really grand touring cars. They would be
correct.
That's
right.
A Jaguar, XK or something along those lines.
Right.
But on the Gen 3 Supra was always like one of my favorite cars, because I'm a big fan of the Targa tops. So you've got removable Targa top as an option.
Yep.
Big comfortable seats in the interior, wraparound dash.
Yep.
If you're into car stereos, the Gen 3 Supras were fantastic cars as a platform because the placement of the speakers, they had 6.5-inch speakers in the doors, which means that if you replace those speakers and upgrade them with a nice set of, separates with a sub, you've got 6.5-inch separates in the doors. There's room in the trunk for subwoofers. So you've got, take your top off, turn your stereo up, grab your CD book, grab your favorite CD, or, flip open the changer in the trunk or whatever it is. And dude, you've got a great, comfortable, ride that's good at 100 miles an hour to cruise on the street.
Yeah.
Are you going to go time attack on the track? You could if you built it that way, but not really what it's for. It's a cool cruising car that you can just enjoy. And like I said, that's, so you kind of look at it that way. I mean, I looked at some of these as specifically like, what am I going to do with it? What's the best platform, to build that with?
Yeah.
So yeah, so like I said, and the 96, the 1990 and 96, the next gen 300Zs were a little more complicated to work on. But if you got the turbos, that V6 was stout.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was a little busy in the engine compartment, but they've been torn apart all over the internet.
Right.
There are Nissan specialists in almost every major town that if you run into you that's above your, above your capability there, I guarantee there's somebody
but still super mechanical cars, right? Again, not
and really well engineered. I can tell you, little things like, so when I was doing car stereos back like high school and college, like I remember taking apart a Nissan 300Z, and when you had to take the door sill off the car, they were screwed in like most cars were. But like if you've ever done it on a GM, they're just screwed into metal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Rust and everything else. But like Nissan went one step further, and I remember thinking they were the first ones I remember seeing that they did plastic inserts in the metal, and then the screw went into the plastic insert, which meant that if it loosened up, all you had to do was replace the plastic insert. It wasn't, it wasn't drilling into the metal, so causing rust and issues like that. So there are a lot of things that Nissan engineered in that car, small little things that made them livable. And I think that, and the quality of the interiors and the plastics on the Supra and the Nissans, they withstand the test of time.
Yeah.
The earlier Gen 300Zs, some of the plastic got dry if they were stored outside, but
well, and I would even go so far as to say like the early Zs, when you're talking 85, 84, 85, 86, they had these great kind of xylophone style digital dashes, this piano digital dashes. And, it was one of the first where you would open the door and it had this little, chip in there and say your door is ajar and stuff like that, or your headlights are on, which was a great little gimmicky thing.
Speaking of headlights, flip up headlights, right? And they're, stuff like that is very nostalgic. But by today, like I would like to see some of that stuff come back. And like Vinny and I were talking about trends that we want to see go away and stuff that we want to see come back. I would love, I get it. I understand why flip up headlights went away, but they're so cool. I don't care who you are. They are like, I always thought that was such a great feature on a car. Yeah. And that took it to like that next level of coolness when you start, like you talk about, take a Ferrari F40. Okay, obviously unaffordable, but how many times have you ever seen a Ferrari F40 with the headlights up? Did you even know there were headlights? You didn't even realize it had flip up headlights.
Or a Testarossa, or something like that. I think it was
Countach.
A time. Same thing, right? Countach. Nobody thought they had. They just thought, I don't know what they thought, that they were just mystically the whole front end would light up, but you never looked at a Countach and said, I can't wait to see the headlights go up, because you didn't know they were there.
No.
There's
something about flip up headlights that just makes everybody happy. Like there's just, C4 Corvette where they rotated around, or the
928
Rivieras where they clamshelled open, like anything, I mean, I remember even something as stupid like on my 80 series Land Cruiser having manual control over the power antenna going up and down. Right. Which is functional for off-roading if you want to, you still want to hear the radio or do something without the antenna being up and getting hit by a tree. But like being able to roll in somewhere and I would play with it all the time. Just, put the antenna halfway down, maybe up. Like anytime you get a chance to control something like that and make it transform or make it move, it just always seemed cooler.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
There was a Nissan or an Infiniti that had, maybe it was a Mazda. It was the Mazda 929s that had the air vents that would oscillate.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, probably a dumb feature. Probably like, I mean, everyone I ever saw worked. So I don't know if they ever did break a lot, but everyone I sat in worked. But like, what a dumb, cool feature. And like how I would be there and just watch them.
Well, there was that. And you remember automatic seatbelts?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Automatic, like everything from Nissans to Toyotas to Testarossas had automatic seatbelts that went up and down.
Oh, sure.
And by today's standards, you're like, well, I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but it was like a trend in the 80s and in the early 90s that you would see. And do I want to see that stuff come back? I don't know about that, but like, again, pop-up headlights. I miss the more angular stylistic things that were in the 80s and 90s, as opposed to everything now that just looks like a jelly bean. I kind of want to see smaller wheels come back. I know that sounds weird, but like I wouldn't mind seeing like a really cool something on 16s or 15-inch wheels with some real sidewall on it. Cause I think that's another stylistic cue that I like.
We were talking about that the other day. So there was a car that popped up for sale that one of the guys in the shop were looking at. They wanted to buy an Integra, like an older one.
Yeah.
He got rid of his hatchback, was looking at Integra LSs and GSRs. And somehow a 91 Honda Civic hatchback SI showed up, and it was all custom, a wall of speakers and all these other things like that. And it had original niche chrome directional wheels, which were super old from the mid 90s. But when you zoomed in, it had BF Goodrich Euro radial TAs on it. And most people don't even remember when those cars came around, but back in the mid 90s, when that whole 15-inch, 16-inch car scene was there for that look, BF Goodrich made a 195 50-15 or 205 40-16.
Yeah.
And it was like, to get that look, that was your only option. And now these guys had built cars back in the day around that entire tire size, and now you can't get it. But like, to bring back the Euro radial tire size, so you have options to customize your car into something a little different.
Yeah.
Would be very cool. Would be very,
well, I think, yes, I think that is 100%. I don't know. And this is the thing when you get older, right? You look at stuff, and we're not saying that these vehicles are better, because they're not, right? These vehicles are they're just different, and there's things that you could jump in, modify, play with. And again, this is where all the auction sites, all the classified sites now, where you look through stuff. The perfect example is like the Civic, right? Like a first gen, or not first gen, but like a late 80s Honda Civic, two-door, two-seater, SI, tiny little minuscule. I mean, they are tiny. But my God, I remember I had a buddy named Billy who had one when I was in college. It was a hoot. What a great little car. It revved to the moon. It wasn't that fast, but it was fun and it was engaging. And I'm starting to kind of revert back to that. Like, I want that small, fun engagement level. And, Vinny's got his old school, 65 Caddy. I've got my old Dodges that are monstrous, but there's something about getting into an old school little hot hatch that are still like a first gen Rabbit or a first gen GTI. I got one for you.
Geostorm GSI.
But dude, great. This is a great story. So this is the problem. So a buddy of mine had the Suzuki version of that. It was the Suzuki
not the Swift. But
it was the Suzuki Swift GT or something like that.
That's the Suzuki version of the Geo Metro. The Storm was the
the Storm was the other one. That was the more angular,
more of a bigger hat and more of a bigger coupe.
Right.
That they did an Isuzu version of it as well.
Those cars are so much fun.
Oh,
they're so much fun, and they're so cheap right now. You could pick them up for nothing. Yeah. And it's like, those are cars that just offer you such a great analog driving experience for no money, with a manual transmission that you can get in. You can take it to red light in every gear. You might only be doing 48 miles an hour, but that's fine. Yeah. It's still fun, and they actually handle quite well.
And you're still going to pull up to Cars and Coffee and have all the enthusiasts go, "Oh my God, I haven't seen the Suzuki Swift in 20 years." And like, next thing you know, you've got a crowd of people around you. You're like, why are all these people taking pictures of my $4,000 car? And it's like, because we all know, like we all know. And that's what happens. Like, you go to a Cars and Coffee and you're looking at these guys that are bringing out these weird cars that they didn't think they were going to be anything. And next thing you know, you're taking pictures of, something strange that you would have never thought of. But yeah, the Geostorm had handling by Lotus. The Metro had the Suzuki Swift version, which was like a 3-cylinder.
Yeah, that's right.
But it had 15-inch wheels, and it had disc brakes and all these things. You just don't know. I mean, that kind of stuff is definitely cool. Definitely.
Well, here's another one I want to throw out there. And I got a buddy, my friend Mike Rosie. God bless him. He is just the collector of the eclectic and strange and fun. Mike he's the fucking best. So, Mike just bought 2 mid-80s Thunderbirds. One is a turbo coupe, and the other is a 5-liter. And and now he's got me looking at them, because I'm like, so the turbo coupes were, especially like the 88s. The 88 turbo coupe was a great looking car. They came with, you could either get the turbo 4, you could have got them with the 6, or you could get them with the 5-liter that came in every Fox body, And the cool part is that, and the Lincoln Mark 7, okay, They are Fox bodies. That's what people don't understand. They are Fox bodies. So everything that bolts onto a Mustang will bolt on to the Lincoln or bolt on to the Thunderbird.
Yep.
They are great cruisers. They're my buddy Jimmy had one in high school. He had the 5-liter and with a limited slip, and we used to abuse that car. But they were fun. They were just fun cars.
Back then, the insurance was cheaper on the Thunderbird versus the Mustang.
That's right.
You had all these different options, and then if you want to go one step further, a little bit newer on the Ford, but the Thunderbird SC with the supercharged V6.
Yeah,
bigger. Again, like a GT car, a little bit bigger cruiser, but you could get that supercharged V6 with a manual transmission in that big.
That's right.
Which my buddy Randy had one, and I used to drive.
Dude, they were fast, weren't they? Like 140, 150 mile an hour cars.
They were quick. We used to drive from Tampa to Tallahassee to go visit our friends up at FSU in college, and we would always take Randy's car because we could fit 4 guys, luggage, and still cruise at 100 miles an hour comfortably the whole way up there. And then you get into like the Taurus shows, the SHOs.
That's another one. Mike had it yours too that he got rid of recently.
Manual transmission, V6. It has all of the stuff, and that and the Contour SVT were both cars that the Ford. You remember that one? My buddy Vinny Palmieri just bought and again going back into the high school stuff. So Vinny wanted a Contour when he was in high school. He now has kids. He's successful in the whole 9 yards. So he had his option to get whatever he wanted. He came across this Contour and then went nuts with it, completely nuts. He did suspension, rims. He had the engine swapped with a newer, a new, bigger V6, all these things. But he goes out to these cars and coffee shows, and it's the car he always wanted. It's built the way he always wanted it built. He's into it for a fraction of what his buddies with his, brand new C8 Corvettes and Porsches are at. And he pulls up to a show and people ignore the new 911 and they come over and they're like, dude, this Contour is so dope.
And here's the best part. When you talk about Contours and Thunderbirds and Mark 7 Lincolns, these are we're talking sub $10,000 cars. Oh, and in many cases, sub $6,000 cars. Yeah. Right.
So if your budget is 10, you've got $10,000, I want to buy a toy. If you find one for 6, that gives you 4 to put to baselining it, because that's something you're going to want to do. You're going to want to change every fluid in the car, check every piece of rubber in the car, and go through and baseline it, which on a car like that's going to cost you $1,000, $1,500, maybe if you need parts. So now you've got a car that every single thing's been done, even if you need brake pads, if you need, anything over 100,000 miles.
Which you can do yourself.
Brake lines. Yeah, and that's stuff you can all do yourself. And then you've got a couple of $1,000s left over to make it yours. Maybe upgrade the stereo with a period correct stereo is another thing that's coming back. These guys are wanting PPI Art Series amps and Orion Monsters. And, I mean, there's forums all over Facebook and on the internet for guys that are just buying and selling these older, Alpine radio restoration shops and things like that. So that these guys want, just like I never got a chance to afford it in high school, I want it that way now. And now I'm reliving my youth. And you're doing it for $10,000 to $15,000.
Yeah.
And listen, there's a time and a place. You and I know there's a time and a place for 6-figure fun cars. That's great.
There is.
But my thing has always been, and you used the word better earlier, which makes me cringe, because all the years I've been going to all of these shows, and that's working for OEMs and doing custom things like that. It's my Ferrari's better than your Lamborghini. My Ford's better than your Chevy. And it's like, you have to take that word out of your vocabulary if you're going to be an enthusiast. And you have to understand that when you're buying a car like this, a $10,000 toy that you're going to put 5,000 to 6,000 miles a year on, you're buying it for literally just for the experience of owning it, driving it, and being with it. There's a time and a place to build a race car that I want to do sub 8 second quarter miles. There's a time and a place to do
absolutely
everything else. But if you look at buying these cars, the reason you and I and the other ridiculous, enthusiasts out there have multiple cars is because each one of those cars that you have, and yours especially, you have a pretty diverse collection, like a lot of these guys do. Now you've got your crazy friend that has 5 Mustangs, whatever. Yeah. But most of us that have multiple cars, to justify it to other people and say, why do you have 4 cars? All right, well, I've got my daily, I've got this, I've got that. Every one of those has a different experience. And I used to explain to people at these shows and say, look, you base the experience on driving the car the same way that you base, and you and I have said this before, you base it on the same way you pick a vacation. Right. And so like, if I want to go snow skiing, or if I want to go scuba diving, those are 2 different vacations and 2 different experiences in 2 different places. One isn't necessarily better than the other.
Correct.
two completely different experiences. And you can't go out and say, I want to go snow skiing this weekend. I'm going to do this, and say, okay, well then we're going to go to the Keys.
Yeah.
It's not the experience that you wanted going into it.
Right.
So if you can eliminate the better, when it comes to comparing cars and experiences, you'll get a better mindset over why you're doing this. And you say, because your Mustang, your 300Z, your whatever it is not going to be the same experience as a brand new 911. It's just not. But
no,
that's not what you're trying. Nobody is cross shopping 992 911s with 64 Cavieras.
Right.
You're not.
Well, and I think it's, to your point, it's really interesting. Like, we were on test, like literally outside, we recently had a Cadillac Escalade V, right? 685 horsepower, beast of a truck. It's a thing, right? But I don't want it. Like, I drove it and I think it's great and it's fast and it's reliable and it has every bell and whistle. But if you were to say, Mike, do you want your 96, and I'm being totally honest here, do you want your 96 Bronco or do you want the Cadillac? I'm taking my Bronco. And it has nothing to do with performance. It has to do with the way that the truck makes me feel every time I get in it. It's
and no matter what you do to the Bronco, it'll never feel like the Escalade. And whatever you do to the Escalade is never going to give you what the Bronco gives you.
Correct. That's exactly correct. And I think that's, as enthusiasts, that's what we look for. Yeah. And, going again, back to your point, all these cars fill a different void. Right. And when people ask me, well, is it any good? And it's good is, that's it. And I did use the word better, and I probably shouldn't have, and you're right about that. It's different. Is a Cadillac, an Escalade V, better than my Bronco? Well, is it more reliable? I don't know. We'll see in 10 years. My Bronco's been around for 26 years. I'd turnkey drive it anywhere right now. No problem. Does it get better gas mileage than a Cadillac V? Shockingly, yes, it does. Right.
The way we drive the Cadillac.
Is it more comfortable? Well, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but you know what? The seats are more comfortable. So it really kind of, you set your expectations. Now, can I cruise at 100? No, I can't. I can cruise at 70, and that's where it wants to be.
Can you tow a 25-foot boat?
No, you're pushing it, right? I could tow a motorcycle trailer.
The yard, but you're not taking it cross country.
No, but like, could I tow a Miata on a trailer with a Bronco? Sure, no problem. Piece of cake, right? Yeah. So I look at things like that, and I also look at my price point, and this goes back to the amount of enjoyment you get per dollar, right? I'm not spending $150,000 on something that brings me no more enjoyment than something that I spent $10,000 on.
And there's something to be said about a new car. If you're the type of person that every nick and scratch and imperfection is going to drive you nuts, buying a new car is a different level of anxiety.
Yeah.
Because you have a 25, 30-year-old car that isn't quite perfect. You can just enjoy it. Keep it clean, polish the paint. If it gets a nick or a scratch, it is what it is. You just move forward with it and say, okay, great.
Yeah.
So it really does come back to purchasing the right vehicle for what it is that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And again, you're not going to, if you need a full-size F-350 for towing or for work, you're not going to get away with a minivan to replace that.
Right.
So you pick the specific tool for the job. And in this case, we're talking enjoyment, we're talking fun, we're talking, whatever it is that you're looking to get out of it, you want to execute the right thing. But I think there are a handful of options on our list that, you may get lucky to where they're going to increase in value. And so you're able to enjoy them and drive them. And then as you're, whereas you buy that new Escalade, or the new 911, or maybe 911 is not a good example, but a new Escalade or a new C8 Corvette or something like that, it's going to depreciate. And it's going to be 50 years before it comes back to that.
Right.
Whereas, if you're into a $15,000, $20,000 car with the right options, with the right thing, you keep it clean, you keep it running, chances are after 5 years, you probably can turn around and sell it for around the same price.
Because and you're already buying at the bottom. You're already buying in the basement.
Yeah.
And there's something really nice about doing that. There's something really nice about being like, I paid $6,000 for this thing and I've had it for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years. right?
Yeah.
And now it's worth still $6,000, right? So you're basically, or maybe it goes up in value, maybe it goes to 10 grand or whatever the case is, but you're putting your money in a place that you can enjoy it and you can have fun with it. And like Vinny said, you don't have that anxiety where I look at my Bronco. My Bronco's got a couple of dings in it. It's got some scratches on it. The paint is faded in a couple of places. I don't care. Do I want to restore it? I don't, because then that enjoyment of going to the parking lot, taking it down a dirt road, doing all this stuff, that goes away, right?
We've had show cars before. I mean,
Right.
I've had, trailer it to the event.
Oh yeah.
Spend 3 days detailing it. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a time and a place for that in your collection if you have the means, or if that's there are people that's what they live for, is they build a show car, and like the lowrider guys and things like that. But even those guys will have polished A-arms and mirrors underneath their stuff, but they still drive it to the event. Like, you'll very rarely see a lowrider guy with a trailer.
No. They very rarely.
They may spend a week polishing after the fact or cleaning it or whatever, but they built those things to have fun with, no matter what. And same thing with a lot of these older cars. So there is a time and a place for show cars, but that's not what we're talking here. We're talking, let's get into something and enjoy it and not be too scared of it. And again, you have to have the right mindset and understand they're not going to be perfect. There's going to be wrong with them. There's going to make some noises. You're going to have, in a newer car, you don't have to keep a box of spare parts and belts and radiator fluid and things like that in the trunk. But, again, it's part of the experience, man. I mean, my Caddy left me stranded on the side of the road once, and I still didn't have to tow it out. I was able to, bring some parts in from wherever else and fix it. And I was able to steal I broke the bolt on the alternator trying to fix a belt, and I was able to steal a bolt from somewhere else in the engine to make the alternator work. And I still drove it home, so I've never had it, and even, dumping coolant out when a freeze plug blew out, I was able to plug it up and still drive it home and replace it then. So if you're mechanically inclined enough, it's all part of the adventure though, because now you're telling stories, and now you're stuck on the side of the road with a 64 Impala with your hood up. Somebody else
is going to stop
and ask you if you need help, whatever. The motorcycle guys do that all the time. If you see a motorcycle guy pulled over, you usually stop and say, hey, listen, you okay? Do you need something, whatever?
Yeah.
There's that camaraderie there that, that bridges the gap of all things. And I mean, I've stopped on the side of the road with cars and said, hey, you need a ride to the next exit. You got somebody coming, what's going on? Is there anything we could do to help? Maybe I have a tool in my truck. I don't know, but it's part of the lifestyle of, if you want to get into that, is not replaceable with anything else. It's just
exactly. Well, let me ask you, okay, so what would you buy? Because we're running out of time. What would you buy? You got that $15,000 budget. What's on your radar? See, and I know there's probably 10 things on the radar. It's a hard question.
Down the list. This is going to sound strange. High mileage Typhoon.
Okay. Yep.
Or mini trucks.
Oh, dude, I feel like the Maverick is bringing back the mini truck, which I like.
Right. So if you look at I worked with the in the shop next to this guy, Brock, who passed away on his motorcycle, unfortunately, but he had a Toyota extended cab, 4-wheel drive, sunroof option, power windows, fully loaded, V6, the whole 9 yards extended cab. And I just always thought it was the coolest truck. Now we're talking, around the T100, but the smaller era.
Sure.
Not Tacoma, right before the Tacoma. So they shared parts from the 4Runner. And if you look at those things on Bring a Trailer now, if you can even find one clean, they're going through the roof. But so you can probably get into one for around 10 grand. And that's another thing. It's going to, but the mini trucks, standard cab, Nissan hard bodies and things like that, they're all coming back for that same reason, where these guys are rebuilding their youth. They're building the mini trucks they never got a chance to. And Maverick is seeing it now at SEMA. We saw a bunch of Mavericks at SEMA that were all being checked out, because they're affordable, they're reliable, they're good gas mileage, and it's a platform for doing whatever you want with. I mean, you see the guys are coming back with the scissor lift beds.
Oh yeah.
And, all that stuff is coming back now.
So so mini truck, that's what you go with?
Mini truck would be one. I would probably look for something like either a Lincoln Mark 8
Yeah, sure.
Which again had that 5-liter, but that was a super futuristic wraparound dash and things like that. Trying to think like a one from each category. C4 Corvettes are
Oh
good.
yeah,
If
C4. If I could buy a C4, I would totally buy a Grand Sport. 96 Grand Sport. I love that car. I think it's brilliant. The interiors are just so overly funky that it's hilarious to look at.
There's a handful of options out there that I personally would still look at. So
yeah,
we'll see. We'll see what's
okay. No, that works. I don't know.
What do you want to see come back? Do we have time to get into that?
Yeah. God. I mean, I think stereos are one, meaning like I'm a huge fan of rack systems. I like them. I always have. I look back at like the Denon and the Onkyo systems that I've had in the past, and Sony's and Pioneers and all that stuff. And there was something fun about saving up enough money to go buy that receiver or that dual cassette or the speakers that were 2 feet high or whatever the case was. I miss that electronic customizability in cars now, where everything is it's so difficult to put a stereo like in a new car to customize it, because you're really ripping apart an entire dash. And when you pull the infotainment system in cars now are such an integral part of how the whole vehicle operates. You can't just replace it. And it makes it difficult to personalize stuff, because every component on a vehicle now that you touch affects the entire vehicle, which I don't like. On the older cars, you wanted to do wheels, do it. You want to do brakes, do it. You want to do electronics, do it. Paint, windows. I mean, you could touch everything. And the integrity of the vehicle, meaning the reliability of the vehicle, 9 times out of 10 would never be compromised. You can't do that on new cars today.
Or you could pull all of that stuff out and still use the vehicle, whereas now you couldn't do that. So, but a lot of the companies are starting to recognize that. Like Alpine has a new F1 system. There's a lot of these other companies that are doing standalone systems that the amplifiers have Bluetooth built into them. So you can go from your phone directly to the amplifier and the Bluetooth and adjust your parameters through an app or whatever. So you're leaving the factory stereo in there, but you're still adding subwoofers and speakers and things like that, in addition to, so you're, that's a trend that you're starting to see, for exactly that same reason, because guys like you want to see that. For me, what I want to see come back is just buttons. Like
I would
knobs, physical buttons, things to touch, just manual control. There's nothing worse than the Cadillac, entertainment system where you have to change the volume, you have to press your finger back and forth. There is something so satisfying about grabbing a volume knob and just cranking it down. Yeah, I know there's a mute button. But like, in my daily, Land Cruiser, I've got a knob and I just turn the volume down, and I have stereo.
Love it.
But I rarely use them. I just turn the knob, and if I'm seeking through stations, I'm usually using the button on there and I'm not using the steering wheel for some reason. It feels right. So
God, that's such a great point.
Yeah. I just want to touch things. I want buttons, I want to touch something and something happens and that's it. And well,
that's your earlier point that you made with the Land Cruiser about the antenna, right? That you could physically control that. I love that, because there is something so satisfying about it.
It's dumb. It's absolutely, there's no reason for it, but it's so satisfying. It happens.
Yeah. Dude, that's great. I love that. And I agree with that. I would love to see new cars infuse a bunch of analog stuff, or at least fake it. You know what I mean? Make us feel like we're doing something.
Well, I mean, the new Jeep Wagoneer has the Macintosh system, and it's got the analog.
Love that.
Is it useful? Do most people going to understand it? No, but there's something satisfying about watching a VU meter go like this as you're driving, or back in the day when the
oh God, wasn't that great?
Equalizers.
The equalizers going up and down.
Clarion had the head unit that had a display that, like, you could choose the different animations that were happening as it would go. It would be like fireworks and like little squares and different things. And it was zero use for it, but there was something satisfying about it. And it's Tesla with their, I'm going to play video games, their dashboard, it's not the same. It's not the same. There's just something that needs to be that analog connectivity that we lose with the digital age, you lose that emotional connection to your car.
Yeah.
And it's stuff like flip up headlights where I press a button and something happens and I'm
Right.
doing that. I'm controlling it. It's not that, oh, I hit 30 miles an hour and it's dusk and the sun is at 30 degrees and the computer senses my GPS and it senses it. And so I'm going to flip the headlights up now. No, I want to be able to flip the headlights up.
Well, it's so funny because we talk about that and like, I don't have every single car that I own. I have 7 still uses a key, right? It uses a key. I have nothing with automatic headlights. I physically have to turn the headlights on. I physically have to turn everything on. If there's a feature that I want to work, I manually have to turn a switch to get it to operate. And I really like that. I just do. I just do.
I was just driving the Lucid the other day. I mean, the new cars, the new technology are amazing in its own right. But again, it goes back to that is a different experience. That is, to be able to car, turn the AC down to 60 degrees or, hey, change the radio station to this and this while you're driving and doing whatever. There's a time and a place for that, but that's not the same experience as your rear window, wiper needs to be turned on and you're trying to figure out on which stalk do I have to press it this way? And because every car is different, I can't, or where's the switch to do this or that, or rear defrosters need to be turned on and things like that. There's something to be said. So I personally, what do I want to see come back? Like you had said, the older, I want to see buttons come back. I'd love to see the smaller wheels and tires come back. I think people don't understand the ride quality on having a little bit of sidewall. May not handle the best, it may not be whatever, but again, just to get into like ride quality and visuals, there's something about a nice, look, the BF Goodrich white walls, with a 70 series, tire.
Amazing. They look great.
Nostalgic and it's iconic and it's never, that you're never going to replace that with a Michelin PS, 2.
No, dude.
Sidewall.
But there's something I had always wanted, and I swear, and I still do. I want to own another car for the simple fact that I could put BFG radial TAs on it.
Yeah.
Building a car, like I want to build a car around a tire. Yeah.
You're not a car enthusiast if you haven't had wheels before and then bought a car to fit wheels or tires, like you said.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
We've all had, if you don't physically already own them, you already will know right away. We were just talking about a motorcycle I want to get. I already have exhaust picked out. I already have accessories picked out. I haven't even bought the bike yet. I already know what's happening to it within the first 2 weeks of owning it.
Which makes sense.
What's fun is you're planning all of these things, knowing what you want, knowing what you want to experience, and it's going to help you narrow down the car that you pick. And again, it all comes back to, just having that, the wherewithal to be able to say, this is what I want, and this is where I'm going to find it. And I encourage everybody to get, find something weird. Is it going to be a Chrysler Cordoba? Is it going to be a Mitsubishi Starion? Is it going to be an El Camino? I mean, again, all cars that are, you can be the guy to roll in with a brand new 911 or a C8 Corvette, and it's nice in its own right and it's great. But you and I have both been the guy that rolled in with the weirdest thing in the lot. And when I park my 65 Caddy, in a show that's all exotics and hypercars, and nobody's taking pictures of the Huracan that I'm parked next to. There's something to be said about that. And so, yes, I think it's there. And there's a lot of those older cars that are out there that are still available that that you can get. You just have to think outside the box.
Totally agree. Well, dude, that's a fast hour. Jesus. All right. Well, like I said, think about that, people. Think about what you could get into for not a lot of money. That's fun. That's enjoyable, that you can drive and not worry about nicks and scratches, but instead puts a smile on your face. As always, if you want a car, I'm going to throw this out there. We're Hemmings. We got 25,000, 30,000 cars online. Go to our classifieds at Hemming.com and check it out. Also check out the auction. Vin, I'll probably call you in 10 minutes to continue this conversation. So, but dude, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having
everybody.
Me.
Always. Everybody, listen to what we had to say. Trust us as two guys that have a lot of experience in buying and selling cars, not for investment, but for enjoyment. We kind of do know what we're talking about when it comes to this stuff.
Once in a while. Listen, we've made mistakes, but you learn from them. And, and I think you've amassed a collection that's taken years to be able to fine tune that and get to the point where exactly we're talking about, that this is what I wanted. This is what I want to get experience out. And same thing for me. And it takes time, but you have to figure out how to be honest with yourself and what it is, and not be afraid to get something that's not the norm.
Right.
Get something that really means something to you. And whether it be that, it's your uncle had this car and it was the first time you went for a ride, or whatever it happens to be. But if you've got a story to go with it that you can share when you go there, and it's going to make that so much better, that you're not buying it just to buy it.
Right. Exactly.
So,
well, Vin,
go drive and enjoy.
Exactly. All right, brother.
Take
Thank
care.
you for coming on the show. I will talk to you very shortly.
All right. See you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod BBQ Podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod BBQ Podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.